Hi, I'm Walker Thornton. I'm an author and a public speaker, and I want to talk to you today about pleasure. I love talking about pleasure. My preferred topic is sexual pleasure. I often talk and speak to people about sex, sexuality, aging, dating, and relationships as it applies to women in midlife and beyond. And I think pleasure is just super important. So this is just a short video to sort of put my face in front of yours, to introduce myself, to tell you about my book, and to talk about pleasure. When I wrote Inviting Desire last year, I was looking at those things that we as women can do when sex feels not as important as it used to. The tips and ideas we need as we find our way to new sex or reapproaching relationships or coping with our lives as single individuals and still being sexual. And a big part of that is understanding the role that pleasure plays in our individual lives. Not always about a partner, but what pleasure is all about. And while the book is focused on sexual pleasure, we have to start with general pleasure in order to understand what drives us towards sexual pleasure, and just because it's an easy, gentle place to start if we're thinking about making those changes in our lives. I think pleasure is a birthright. I think we all deserve to have pleasure, and most of us would say we have lots of pleasure in our lives. And sometimes we don't feel that we have enough. Life gets in the way. Menopause can be a challenge for some women and cause a change in hormones and sensations and relationships. And then they're just everyday stressors. We get too caught up in work, caregiving, family, any number of things, and forget to take care of ourselves, to find the things that bring us pleasure, to treat ourselves, to nourish and care for our own bodies. And the very first step, in my mind, to creating a healthy sexuality is being in touch with ourselves, being able to understand our bodies, being able to play and luxuriate in ourselves before we approach relationships. And it boils down to pleasure. Um, Pleasure, in its easiest sense, I think, starts when we look at all of our senses. Because when we think about pleasure, we see pleasure, we feel pleasure, we hear something that gives us pleasure. It's all connected to the senses, which is how I started the book, talking about each sense with exercises and ideas on ways to stimulate our taste, our sense of touch. Touch is so important to me, and I think it's important to all of us, not only awakening our own skin, but learning what we like in touching other things and in how we're touched. And that can be as simple as exploring the texture of clothes, feeling our skin tingle at certain things, feeling our toes in that new green grass as spring comes. Just ways that we experience pleasure. Because I feel like one of the ways we move forward is to take pleasure and then to give pleasure and then to feel pleasure. And they all sort of roll into each other. And I know I sort of ad-libbed that and it didn't flow as beautifully as I would like it to. But the point is that we have a right to pleasure. We have a right to figure out what we like, how we get more of it, and then down the road, how do we ask for the things that give us pleasure? So I would ask you to do one small thing. I will come back in a couple of weeks with a longer video where I talk about specifics around pleasure more in a sensuous and a sexual place. But for now, I'd like you to walk away from this with a curiosity about what you like, what your likes and pleasures are. Make a list. Name 5 things, name 50 things. What gives me pleasure? My list might start with chocolate mousse or really wonderful gelato, a nice full-bodied red wine, my toes in a in a spring or a creek, feeling the green grass under my bare feet. I don't have any shoes on right now. It's spring, the doors are open, I can smell the grass being cut. I want to feel alive, and I want you to decide what makes you feel alive. What do you love? What gives you pleasure? So write these things down, think a little bit about it, give yourself some pleasure in whatever way works for you, and then look to see me in a couple of weeks. If you look under the video here, you will see my website and some information on how you can follow and connect with me. Drop me a note if you'd like. I'd love to hear from you. And I want to encourage you to think about your own needs and how you can create a more pleasurable life. Have a good afternoon.